Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Frank Demore with the Last Chronicles of Planet Earth. If this is the first time at my YouTube channel, you can cross over to my prophecy site where you can download my book for free. It's a documentary on Bible, prophecy, and current events. And you're going to see why the news that you're watching is really relevant to these last days. So just go to my website, www.bibleprophecyman.com, and when you're there, you'll see the front and the back cover of the book. Right below it is a link. You can click to the link and today download the book today for free. I want to get into some really important news because this is news that pertains straight out for the last days, and you'll find it in Ezekiel's prophecy. You'll find it also in Zechariah's prophecy that I've been giving to you a lot of information about these two prophecies over the last month. I'd like to center first of all with Zechariah chapter 12 verse 3. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's a prophecy where Zechariah the prophet was told by God that in the last days Jerusalem would become a burdensome stone for all people. And if you read the scripture, it says that all the nations will be coming against Israel in the last days. It doesn't say some or few. It says all of the nations will be coming against Israel in the last days, and specifically that Jerusalem will be a burdensome stone for all people, which it already has. So we know that in the last days, one of the signs that you should be looking for, first of all, you should be looking for Jesus Christ. That's the first thing, because he said, when you shall see all these things, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. So keep looking up. But one of the second things you should be looking for, or the second thing you should be looking for, is what happens in Israel. Watch what happens in the Middle East pertaining to Israel, and specifically Jerusalem. Because if the Zechariah told us that Israel is going to be standing alone in the last days, and they would see that Jerusalem was a burdensome stone, well, if we are in the last days, then this prophecy has to be, the paving for this prophecy has to be coming into play right now, which it is. Now, there's an example of it today. If you go to my website, you'll see an article that I'm going to put up here. You may not be able to read it very good here, but you can go and click to the link at my website and you'll be able to see it. Now, this is a story about Israel feeling despair and being left alone and what's happening in the Middle East. And I'm going to read a little bit of it. It says, over the past several years, a growing number of patriotic Israelis have begun to despair. We can't stand up to the whole world. Please listen to the words that they're using, because these words are identical to the warning Zechariah gave to us, where the Lord showed us that Israel was going to have to stand up to the whole world. But it would be God who intervenes, and we know that for sure, because in the book of Revelation, we see Jesus stepping in and destroying the Antichrist and his armies and all the unrighteous people at the Battle of Armageddon, which will be the last battle fought. It goes on to say, we can't stand up to the whole world, they say. At the end of the day, we will have to give in and surrender most of the land, or all the land we took control over in 1967 Six-Day War. The world won't accept anything less. Now, what's happening is that little by little, nation after nation, which I've already shown to you, and you could go into my archives and see all these things, all the news that I've been showing you, that nation after nation is beginning to recognize the Palestinian state as a new state. Much in the same ways as Israel did in 1948, when Israel, they became a nation after United Nations proclaimed that they were a nation. And this is what the Palestinians are working their way to. But in the meantime, what's happening is, as the time is progressing, we're seeing firsthand how the nations of the world are coming against Israel and Jerusalem. It goes on to say here in this article, these statements have grown more stringent in the wake of the slaughter of Fugel family last Friday night. Now, what they were talking about in the West Bank, the Palestinians attacked the family and they stabbed them, all of them, killed them all. Kids, I mean, it was horrific. And this is the incident that they were talking about. And if you've been coming to my website and my YouTube videos, I've been warning, they're not going to stop. The Palestinians aren't going to stop. The Hamas isn't going to stop. The Hezbollah, they're not going to stop. The Fatah isn't going to stop. These are all organizations of the Palestinians who, in their charter, calls for the destruction of the nation Israel. And these are the people the Israelis are supposed to sit down with and to talk peace. It's not going to really happen that way. That's for sure. There's going to be war, not peace. So it goes on. It goes on to say the international community, as response to the Palestinian atrocity at Itmar, is pointed to as proof that Israel must surrender. Instead of considering what the savage murder of an Israeli family tells us about the nature of the Palestinian society, the world media has turned the massacre of the Fugel family into a story about settlements. And so what they're showing you is the media is biased on Israel. Now here you have a family in Israel, and the family was attacked. They were all killed. And instead of the media talking about this brutality, what they've done is they just bypassed that and said, well, it's their problem, it's the settlements, and they're in the wrong, more or less, is what they're saying. And this is what the Israelis are writing about, that the media in the world is taking a different look at Israel, and they're coming against Israel. It goes on to say, take the Los Angeles Times, for example. The Times perspective of the Fugels were not Israeli citizens. They were Jewish settlers. In other words, what the LA Times says is that these Jewish people were there illegally. That's what they're really saying here. So, I mean, you know, when you read news, you want to read news without the bias, right? Well, obviously, there's definitely bias being written by the Los Angeles Times. It goes on to say they weren't murdered in their home. They were killed in their tightly guarded compound. So these people were at home. They weren't in a compound. This was their land, their home. I don't care what the Los Angeles Times says. These people were living on their own land. They were attacked. You don't see these settlers going out and shooting arbitrarily Palestinians. It's not happening. But the media doesn't portray it that way. They only show you what the Israelis do after they've been attacked, and it's very biased. And because of much of this, what you're seeing is world opinion is shifting against Israel, and Zechariah's prophecy is definitely coming to pass. It goes on. The Times report was actually comparatively sympathetic. At least it mentioned the murders. Most European papers began their coverage with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's announcement that the government will permit Israelis to build 400 homes in Judea and Samaria. As for the governments of the world, most were far swifter and more aggressive in their condemnation of Netanyahu's announcements of the building permits than they were of their condemnations of the murders. So it's not about the families being killed in Israel. It's about land. In land, that what they're saying here is land that Israel took back. Well, you know, when you're attacked, you defend yourself. And this is what Israel is doing. But we're not going to be seeing that anytime soon in the mainstream media, because they don't want the sides to be leaning towards the Israelis. They definitely want it leaning towards the Palestinians and the Arabs against the Israelis. Now, it goes against. One of the reasons why they're doing this is because they're pushing the issue of Jerusalem. Because if you read this article here, they talk right at the very top, and even the Israelis know that they're being pressured to surrender to the peace talks that the Palestinians want the 1967 borders back, and that's the borders that when Israel was attacked in 1967, they won East Jerusalem. And this is where we have so many problems now, because the Israelis actually own East Jerusalem for the first time in almost 2,000 years, and the Palestinians and the Arabs want it back. And this is, you have the focus solely directed on the nation Israel's capital, which is Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, where the Temple Mount is. And so, yes, Zechariah's prophecy is coming to pass. We're seeing it take place. Israel is being left alone in the world. The world is coming against them. Nation after nation are starting to recognize the Palestinians, as I said. And if you watch the news continuously, you will see more of this type of news coming out, pressing Israel to give away East Jerusalem and to give land away for peace. But last week, as Netanyahu pointed out, and you're going to see some other news about it today that I'm going to discuss with you, that while they're talking peace and safety, you see that these Palestinians, the Hamas and the Fatah and all these other organizations, are sending mortars and rockets into Israel to kill them. And it's you cannot talk peace with people who are sending in these kinds of weapons of destruction to the Israeli citizens. It's just not going to fly. So scroll down and we'll continue on with the news today. Thank you.